We live in perilous times, times that we educators have particular responsibility, times that demand our engagement, our courage, our rigor, and our imagination. It is, in fact, impossible for us to have any conversation that refers to child rearing, teaching and learning, or educational opportunity, access, and outcomes. Any conversation that speaks about the human condition without our minds being flooded by the bloody images that seem to be unleashed with great force when the planes hit the Twin Towers in Lower Manhattan on September 11, 2001, a date now etched in all of our hearts. Perhaps it was the experience of the violence and tragedy on our own soil, touching people who could be our brothers and sisters, our neighbors and friends. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar experience of being the physical targets of foreign fire that awakened in us a new and unwelcome awareness of the accumulating atrocities across our country and around our world. Since 9/11, we have seen the bloodshed up close, multiplied 100-fold by the 24/7 media coverage and amplified by the vast web of social media. Those of us who are responsible for raising and teaching the youngest children are especially devastated by the treachery and tragedy that disproportionately damage the most vulnerable among us. We are racked by the carnage, by the murders of innocent mothers and children in Afghanistan, by the brutal bombings and attacks in Israel and Palestine, and the volatile border conflicts between India and Pakistan, by the genocide and raping of women and girls in the Sudan, by the oppression and massacre of hundreds of thousands of people in Tibet, by the uncovering of rampant pedophilia by priests and bishops of the Catholic Church, by the abduction, rapes, and selling of young women and girls in northern Nigeria, by the open hunting season on unarmed young black men, the murders of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, and a parade of others stand as symbols of the terror all black mothers feel as our sons walk out the door on any ordinary afternoon, by the ambush and carnage of 9 black worshipers in a mother church in Charleston, by the open carry gun laws in Texas and the school shootings in Parkland and Santa Fe, by the mass slaughters in Syria, by the sexual assaults on college campuses, in the military, in Hollywood, among players in the National Football League, and in training rooms for the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team, where the institutional responses have been mostly opaque, inadequate, and irresponsible, by the ugly, mean-spirited, and relentless political discourse filled with obscenities, phobias, and lies, bereft of content and moral anchoring, and by Trump's alarming short-lived policy of splitting up refugee families, tearing mothers and fathers away from their children, creating a burgeoning population of dislocated and frightened children living in makeshift detention centers at our country's borders, and still no clear plan for reuniting families with their abducted children. The symbolism and reality of each of these assaults, taken individually and collectively, make us feel helpless, vulnerable, and victimized. Our tears express our deepest anguish, fears, confusion, and rage. Our democratic values and civil rights seem to be crumbling around us as we work to find our spiritual and moral anchors. In our adult confusion and impotence, we struggle with finding the right words to support and guide our children. During these long years of acute anxiety about our fragile and troubled world, we educators, our society's public adults, have felt a particular challenge and responsibility to take care of the children in our charge, to help them come to terms with these awful, cruel events and their aftermath, to find a precarious balance between mourning and moving on, between revenge and reconciliation, between grieving and getting busy. This afternoon, in the spirit of our Build Conference, Knowledge to Action, I want to address my comments to researchers and practitioners, scholars and activists, policymakers and advocates, and to those who sit on the boundary lines between these domains, to all of us who are focused on achieving the promise of equal educational opportunity for all of our children. But this afternoon, rather than being consumed by the darkness, I want to pivot towards the light. I want to frame our continuing and deepening work as advocates, researchers, and educators in the early childhood field as a project of inspired creativity. By offering 3 challenges to the prevailing language, metaphors, and images that tend to dominate the public dialogues about education and schooling. I fear that as our society and our schools have become increasingly diverse, as the distance between rich and poor continues to widen, the definitions of achievement have grown narrower and more exclusive. At a time when educational cultures need to reflect the plurality of voices, stories, and cultural narratives, a variety of intelligences and identities, and a spirit of inquiry, criticism, and adventure. Many researchers, educators, and policymakers have retreated to a view of achievement that is narrow and monolithic. This narrowing of perspective, this denial of cultural variation is particularly problematic in early childhood education, where a child's developmental journey is launched, where each child's gifts and capacities must be identified and cherished, where the norms, values, and strengths of families and communities must be recognized, and where teaching and learning must include the nourishment of minds, hearts, bodies, and spirits. How might we help to create school cultures from early childhood classrooms through graduate school training that forge the connections between excellence and equity, between learning and justice, and between disciplined inquiry and truth-telling? I want to make 3 modest, ambitious, and intertwined suggestions, all beginning with V. The first has to do with reframing our view. The second centers on the need to lift up our voices. And the third expresses an imperative that everyone in our schools, every child, every student, every teacher, feel seen and known, that everyone be visible. 3 views, 3 V's: view, voice, and visibility. I refer to these V's as liberating frames because I believe that each offers a perspective that challenges the habits and rhetoric, the hopelessness and inaction that too often dominate our educational discourses, particularly those discourses that focus on the seemingly intractable barriers to educational equality.